Well, I'm glad you can be with us this morning as we can continue our study of the book of Genesis and the life of Jacob, who we've been examining these last few weeks. Jacob's one of the Jewish patriarchs. He's grandson of Abraham. He's the son of Isaac and the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. And this morning in Genesis 35, we conclude Jacob's story. It's not the end of Jacob's life. We're going to encounter him throughout the remainder of Genesis. But this is the conclusion of him as the main character in the book of Genesis. And it fits that the conclusion of his story starts with God's voice. God said to Jacob. Because Jacob's life has been one that has been shaped, transformed by the voice of God. Jacob, when he was running from his brother, encountered God. He heard the voice of God in a dream. And then Jacob, when he was with his uncle, God spoke to him and called him back to the promised land. And on the way back to the promised land, it was God's voice and his hands that wrestled with him and changed his heart. Jacob has been a man who has been defined by the voice of God. And here in Genesis 35, God again speaks to Jacob. He says to him, this is chapter 35, verse 1. God said to Jacob, "Arise, go up to Bethel and dwell there. Make an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau." Quick recap. Back in Genesis 28, when Jacob was running for his life, God appeared to him in a dream. And in that dream, God confirmed to Jacob that the promises that were for Abraham and the promises that were for Isaac were for Jacob. He would be a great nation. He would be a blessing to the nations. That was for him. Now, at that time, Jacob did not know God. Matter of fact, interesting thing, if you go in Genesis 28, it says he set up a pillar in Bethel, which was Luz. He named it Bethel, but he set up a pillar there, and there's some who think that that pillar was a part of Canaanite worship. He did not know God. He did not know God. But God appeared to him in a dream, confirmed that God's call was for his life. And at that time, Jacob made a vow. This is Genesis chapter 28, verse 20 through 22. Let me read you the vow. "If God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. And this stone which I have set up as a pillar shall be God's house. And all that you give me, I will give a full tenth to you." Quick paraphrase, right? God, if this promise that you've given me, this promise you've made to me, this calling you have for my life, if that comes to pass, then you will be my God. I will worship you. I will come back to this place, and I will worship you there. Well, flip back to Genesis 35. Everything that God has promised has come to pass. God has provided for Jacob. God has provided for him and given him a wife, and now he has a family. He has returned to his father's house, and God has changed the heart of Jacob, and he has also changed the heart of Esau and allowed reconciliation, which was necessary for Jacob to get back home because he had conflict with his brother. And so God has been faithful to Jacob. And now here in Genesis 35, God speaks to him, calling him to fulfill his vow. God said to Jacob, "Arise, go up to Bethel, dwell there, make an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau." Bethel has a significant place, the calling to go to Bethel. It's a significant place in Jacob's life. That was the place he first encountered God. And it's for that reason God calls him to go back there. When I think of Bethel, I think of a little church in Mifflinburg, Pennsylvania. It's across from Mifflinburg High School. It's got a wooden ceiling, and it's got stained glass that I can remember. And I think of that church because that's my Bethel. That's the place when I was 15 years old, I would walk after school and go to a youth ministry at that church, and that's the place that I first encountered God. And to this day, when God is everywhere, of course, we know that, but to this day, when I go to that church, there's something significant there. It's an emotional significance, it's a spiritual significance, because it's that place that I first encountered God. I'm sure for all of us in this room, there's probably some places like that. Places that we first encountered God. Places that we recommitted our life to God. Places that we decided to step out on faith. And those places, it's not that God's there more than he is here or anywhere else, but those places are significant to our faith. And they're a reminder of the God that we worship and how he's changed our life. Bethel, or Luz, I'm sure if I'm pronouncing it right, is actually what it was named. Jacob's the one who named it Bethel. Interesting, and I mentioned this at the start of service if you were here, interesting little Hebrew study. The word Bethel, remember Hebrew names, they're never just names, almost never. I shouldn't say they're never, but rarely are they just names like this. It's not like Lanham. I mean, I'm sure Lanham means something, but I don't know what it means. Bethel, Beth, is the word for house. El is the word for God. Bethel is the house of God. Some of you have probably heard there are churches that are named Bethel. There's a music group, the Bethel Music Worship, and that's why. That's why, without commenting on any of them, I don't know anything about them, but house of God. House of God. Jacob named that place the house of God. And just think about this for a moment. God is calling Jacob to go to the house of God to make an altar. What's God calling Jacob to do? He's calling him to worship. Genesis 35, verse 1, is a call to worship. It's a call to worship. Go to the house of God, that place that has significance, fulfill your vow, build an altar there. What are you going to do in an altar? Worship. God is calling Jacob to worship. Worship is the odd response to the saving acts and praiseworthy character of God. That's a dictionary definition. The word worship is nowhere in Genesis 35. But don't miss it. Worship is in Genesis 35. Look at that definition. Think about what God's calling Jacob to do. An odd response to the saving acts and praiseworthy character of God. Jacob is being called to go to Bethel to build an altar because God has saved him, because God's character has been manifested and shown to him. And so it's a call on Jacob's life to go there and respond to what God has done. Fulfill the vow that you have made. I have provided for you. I have fulfilled my word. Go and worship. Go and worship. A simpler way to think of worship is how we relate to God. We say that we have a relationship with God. That's language in the Christian world. But do you ever think, what does that mean? I have a relationship with God. Well, I have a relationship with Gene. I have a relationship with Kingsley. Oh, and I have a relationship with God. But they're not all the same, right? They're not all the same. And sometimes we talk about like they're the same, but I'm not sure we really mean that. For one thing, is awesome. Gene is an amazing guy, and so is Kingsley. But God is in a whole nother category. His awesomeness, his greatness, Gene is righteous, but God is perfectly righteous. It's a whole different category when we talk. The level, the distance between man and God is like, I can't even explain it. It's beyond. And because of that, the way that we come to God it's different. It's different. The way that we approach God is different. And if you think about the ways that we actually fellowship, somebody says, I have fellowship with God. Think about everything they might say. I pray, right? That's what we're talking about on Wednesday as a church, praying. I pray to God. I give to God. I give back to God from what he's given me. I serve God. I seek God in his word to encounter his truth. I sing to God. We sing praises, and we're singing, holy, holy is God earlier. And it's like, yes. I don't even know how to put that in words. It's just sort of, it vibrated through my soul, right? And all the ways that we relate to God, what are they? It's worship. All of it. Worship. Now, we talk about worship in a sense like music, but worship is so much more than music. Worship's more than the first 15 minutes of service. Worship is more than a service. Worship is how we relate to God. Worship is the way that we come to God. Worship is if we've been changed by God, then it's the way that we communicate with God. All of that is worship. In one sense, it's a lifestyle, but it's not some vague thing where we can't quite figure out what it is. It's made up of real actions, like things that we actually do. That's worship. And so this morning, we're reading this call on Jacob's life to go and worship God. And for us this morning, if we say that we have a relationship with God, then we should care about worship. We should care about worship. For us this morning, if we want to know God, we want to encounter God, then we should listen to Jacob's story because Jacob is called to worship God and he encounters him there. And so I think as we look at Genesis 35, there are two things that we can learn. One, I think we can learn a little bit about worship today, about how we should worship, what worship looks like. But I also think, perhaps more importantly, we can learn from Jacob's story about what worship means today in this day and age. And the first thing that we learn from Jacob's story about worship, and this is very important, is that worship starts with God. Worship starts with God. Notice Genesis 35:1, God said to Jacob. It does not say Jacob said to God. God said to Jacob. Now, we think about worship starting with God, it might confuse us a little because I don't know about you, but didn't we choose to come here this morning, right? You woke up this morning, the alarm clock went off, you took a shower, you brushed your teeth, or, well, I hope you did. You did all those things. You chose to do that, and you came to the house of worship. Yeah, you chose to do that. And that is true, but let's stop for a minute and back up and think about this. It's God who created us. So before we think about, well, I'm the one who chooses to worship God, just remember that you wouldn't be here if God didn't create you. Think about the Old Testament. Think about the first 11 chapters of Genesis. Remember? It's a terrible story of one train wreck after another. And then God spoke to Abraham. God said to Abraham. Abraham wasn't standing there saying, oh, God, I'm ready to do whatever you want. No, God spoke to Abraham first. God spoke to Jacob. Jacob wasn't looking for God when he was running from him. Think about that for a minute. When he left his brother, when he's running for his life, it was God that came to him in a dream. And we think about today, we think about the New Testament. It's God who came to earth to rescue us. They weren't standing there waiting for him. He was born in a stable. They rejected him and they killed him. It's God who came to earth to save us. Friends, worship starts with God. It starts with God. The reason Jacob's going to Bethel is because God spoke to him. The reason we're here in worship this morning is because God has spoke to us through the Word, His Son, as John 1 says, and through the Word, His Word that we have. We're here today because God has spoke to us. He has called us to worship. But let's be real, there is a response, right? And that's what we did this morning. Worship requires a response. Worship requires a response. God said to Jacob, arise and go. Jacob had to do something. I know that seems really simple, right? Arise and go. That's like the most obvious thing. Go to Bethel, and obviously if he's going to worship God or do anything, he's going to have to arise and go. It's like the most obvious thing. But let's be real, it's probably the hardest one, right? How many of us, no raising of hands, have woken up on a Sunday, not felt well, had a very busy weekend, and thought, I think I'll just stay home today? How many of us have committed to prayer right? We said, how many of us committed to reading the whole Bible, right? Some of us have probably done that. We've committed to reading the whole Bible, maybe last year on the 1st, or maybe even this year on the 1st, and we're going to take time every morning, we're going to read the Bible, and then one morning we woke up at 10 o'clock on a Saturday, and we said, I think I'll skip today. And then that turned into 3 days and 4 days, and then you know what? I'm going to read the Bible plan next January 1st. It starts with us, we have to have a simple response, right? God calls us to worship. God calls Jacob to worship. He says, arise and go. If Jacob is going to get to Bethel, he's going to have to get up and go. If we're going to come to worship, if we're going to worship God, we're going to have to at least move our bones, get our body up, do something. We're going to have to go. Second way that Jacob responds to the call of God, very important, and this is on Jacob's initiative here. So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, put away the foreign gods that are among you. First, he puts away the foreign gods. Now, you know how we sometimes say, you can come to God however you are. You can come to wherever you are at, however you are, just come to God. I think we mean well when we say that. I just don't know if that's biblical. I think about a couple of examples, right? I think of Uzzah, right, who was carrying the Ark of the Covenant, and he stumbled and fell, and he reached out, and God said, don't touch it, and God killed him. I wonder if someone told him, you can just come however you are. I think in the New Testament, Ananias and Sapphira, they're coming to the church and they're going to make an offering and they lie about it. And God kills them. I wonder if someone told them, like, it's okay. You just come however you are. God doesn't care about your heart. You just come and do whatever you want. No, God will transform our hearts. God will work in our life no matter where we're at. But let's be real. There is an appropriate way to approach God. There is an inappropriate way to approach God. Jacob knows that he cannot go to the house of God to worship toting a whole bunch of false gods. And literally what we're talking about is like little figurines, probably. Little pieces of junk that his household had. People that were going with him were going to have. And so he tells them, we've got to get rid of all these little pieces of junk. We can't be going to the house of God and then be worshiping a stick, in the backyard or something. Like, we're not going to do that. That would be inappropriate. And who knows what would have happened if he had not done that. I have to think, knowing the scriptures, that it would have gone badly. There's a sense that we need to recognize in our life that we cannot come to God carrying a whole bunch of false gods and things with us. There needs to be some level of approach that we have. The other thing that he does here is he tells them, purify yourselves and change your garments. So I guess he's telling them to take a shower and put on clean clothes, right? No, that's not exactly what's happening. Purification was culturally probably how they would approach God. If there was a way in their day, we're not exactly sure what it might have looked like. It could have meant taking various baths or various things that they would have done. It was the way that you prepared yourself to go and worship. There was just an appropriate way of doing that. And that's what he calls on his people to do. That's true for us today. It's true for us today. And you think about 50 years ago, and people would have come to church, and they would have been in a suit. That in that culture, that would have been the only appropriate way to come to God. In some places in the world today, that's still the case. That is the cultural norm, to dress in that manner. Today, we're a little less formal. That's our culture today. But there's still some level of inappropriate, right? Like there would still be... It would be inappropriate to come to worship God in pajamas, that are maybe exposing your body. Like even in our culture today, as laid back as we are, there's still some level where it would be inappropriate for us to come to worship in a certain way. And that was true in Jacob's time as well. Jacob is getting his people ready. He's asking them to go through these rituals, these cultural rituals, as they approach God. And so they need to respond to God. Now, one of the interesting things here, and this is just a note, one of the things they had to do is they had to get rid of their earrings. And I think immediately, maybe this was a dress code policy they had. Nobody could have earrings. No. We're not really sure exactly what's going on here, but there's a few ideas, and I think one of them is interesting. Of course, one is that they might be related to false gods. We don't know. Another possibility is that this is some of the loot that they took from the city of Shechem. Remember the prince Shechem last week? Well, that city was named Shechem as well. And some people think that that might be the loot from there. And the reason that some people think that, and we don't know, but the reason some people think that is that various times in the Old Testament, earrings are mentioned with that. Earrings. So they would loot a city and they would take earrings because that was where the gold would be at. They would wear the jewelry. And so it's possible that even in response to this, they're repenting. It's possible that they're called to repentance, to get rid of the loot that they had taken out of anger. It's not certain, but they were called to respond. And we're called to respond to God today. There's a calling. God calls us to worship, and we need to respond if we're going to worship. And Jacob and his people, they responded. Verse 3, it says, Then let us arise, go up to Bethel, so that I may make there an altar to God, who answers me in the day of my distress, has been with me wherever I have gone. So they gave to Jacob, this is the people that were with Jacob, all the foreign gods that they had and the rings that were in their ears, and Jacob hid them under the terebinth tree that was near Shechem. He hid them just under a tree. All the gold earrings, probably the idols that they had, they just dug a hole, hit them, and off they went. Third thing that we discover that we discover about worship is that worship requires faith. And when I say faith, obviously we need saving faith, right? That's why we would worship, because we've encountered the saving act of God. But when I say faith here, I simply mean trusting God. The road to Bethel, the calling that God put on Jacob's life, is a dangerous one. Jacob knows that. If you recall last week, after they raided that town and they killed everybody, Jacob said to his sons, "You guys have made me a stink. Everybody here hates me. They're going to rise up and come after me. I don't have that many people." And so now, flip the page, and God says to Jacob, "All right, get up, go to Bethel." Go through all those neighborhoods that nobody likes you. Jacob needed to trust God to go. And he did trust God, and God responded to them. It says in verse 5, "And they journeyed, and terror from God fell upon the cities that were around them, so that they did not pursue the sons of Jacob." God answered that. I think about right now, this morning, maybe not quite at this time because time is a little different, but I think about right now in Afghanistan, there are believers who are gathering, probably in a house of God, probably somebody's actual house, probably a room, and they're gathering in secret. And they're praying to God, they're trusting to God as they go to worship, because they're going through neighborhoods and places that if they are discovered, they could be arrested, they may be killed, they may be tortured. I'm thinking about their worship. You know how we're belting out the songs? I don't know if they're singing anything. And if they are singing, you know it's got to be very quiet. Their worship looks different. And I think they probably hear this story a little differently than we hear this story. They think, you know what? We do need to trust in God to get to worship. We need to put our faith in God because there is danger around us. Jacob trusted God. He had seen enough of God to know that even though the road was dangerous, it was worth going. He knew that God had called him, and if God had called him, he would make it there. And he gathered his family with courage and boldness, and he went, and God put fear on the people around them. And because of that, he arrives at the house of God. He arrives at Bethel to dwell with God, to be in relationship. That word dwell, it's the idea, you think about dwelling somewhere, a dwelling place, you think of living. Now, Jacob is not moving in to Bethel because right after the story, he moves on. But that word indicates that Jacob is spending time. He is fellowshipping. He is living there in Bethel with God. It's an indication of fellowship. It says in verse 6, Jacob came to Luz, that is Bethel, which is the land of Canaan. He and all the people were with him, and there he built an altar and called the place El Bethel, because there God had revealed himself to him where he fled from his brother. He builds an altar. Where the pillar was, he builds an altar. He calls the place El Bethel. Bethel, remember, is house of God. El Bethel means God of Bethel. God of Bethel. Not, I was saying this morning, if you think about it too much, you would say God of the house of God. Well, that would be confusing. Bethel is actually a name. Even though it means something, it is a real name. And when we say El Bethel, God of Bethel, the place. And later on in the story, we find that Jacob makes an offering. He makes a drink offering. This is one of the only places we see this type of offering. It's a very unique offering. It's different. Basically, he probably poured out some wine or something of value on the altar, and it was an act of sacrifice, of giving that he gave to God. Now, you think about this scene, right? He's come to this place. He's built an altar. That altar didn't look anything like an altar we would think of today. We're probably talking about a pile of rocks or something like that. Builds an altar, and he dumps some wine out over the altar. And you think about worship today, this morning. This is our worship gathering. And you just think of these two pictures, right? They don't sound anything alike. I mean, they don't sound anything alike. Like, this is an entirely different thing that's happening. But both of them are worship. Jacob was worshiping God in his culture and his day according to the Word of God. And you and I this morning, we're here worshiping God in our culture and in this day according to the Word of God. Worship doesn't need to look the same in every place and with every people and every time. Worship looks different. Worship's inherently cultural, right? Because we are people who live in a culture. It changes. It looks different. The clothes we wear are different. And even the way we approach God is different according to what God commands us. Jacob here worshiped God. God called him. Jacob responded. He came to the place of worship, and he worshiped God. And God responded. Friends, God responds to our worship. And for Jacob, that response is very powerful. In verse 9, God appears to Jacob and blesses Jacob. And it seems like it's right in the middle of worship, because he builds the altar, and then God blesses Jacob, and that's when Jacob, after that, gives the drink offering. And this is what God said to him. Your name, this is verse 10, your name is Jacob. No longer shall you be called Jacob, but Israel shall be your name. And so he called his name Israel. And God said to him, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful, multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall come from you, and kings shall come from your own body. The land that I gave to Abraham and to Isaac I will give to you. And I will give the land to your offspring after you. And then God went up from him in the place where he had spoken with him. It's in the house of God, at the altar of God, where Jacob is worshiping God, that God appears and blesses him. And blesses him. He reaffirms who Jacob is, and he reaffirms the promises of Jacob. And more than that, he commands and calls Jacob to fulfill those promises. Now, it's interesting today because I think we could relate to the story in that we want to go to the house of God. We want to worship God because we want to receive a blessing. We want to receive a blessing. But today, and this is kind of interesting, today when we talk about being blessed by God, what are we talking about often? Happiness and money. That's often what we're talking about. God, would you bless me? Would you give me a new job and a new car? Would you make me happy? And would you give me something nice? That would make me happy too. But if that's what blessing is, that doesn't make any sense here. Because think about this for a moment. As they come to the place of worship, their nurse, one of their nurses dies, someone they loved, and they buried her. Immediately after they leave worship, Rachel dies. Just think about that. You call that a blessing? Rachel dies the moment on the way back from worship. Think about if it's finances. Think about what happens just a little later in the story of Joseph. There's a famine and Jacob has to leave. He basically encounters what you could almost say is financial disaster in his position. He didn't get richer and he didn't get happier here in Genesis 35. He didn't get what did he get then? What was the blessing? What is the blessing of worship? Why do we worship? Well, Jacob got to encounter, think about this for a moment. He got to encounter God Almighty. He came to the place of worship and he got to commune with the creator of the universe, came down and spoke to Jacob. The all-powerful, all-knowing God of heaven appeared to Jacob, and that God included Jacob in his plans. That's the blessing. That is the blessing. A lot of times we come to worship and we think, God, would you give me this? Would you give me that? Would you give me that? That would be a blessing. And we fail to realize that it is God who is the blessing. It's God who is the blessing in our lives. God blessed Jacob. He appeared to him and he gave him a promise. He included Jacob in his plans. That's good news for us today. It's really, really good news for us today because Jacob is a part of why we are worshiping this morning. God, through the life of Jacob and his sons, is working to redeem the world. And that redemption we fully understand today because it's brought to its fulfillment through the descendant of Jacob, Jesus Christ. The King of Kings, the Prince of Peace. Jesus is the one. You think about Genesis 11, right? And you think about the divide, right, of the Tower of Babel, and the people are separated and they go out. And then you think the next page, God spoke to Abraham. And that's when God begins his redemption plan. And Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Israel is all a part of a larger story that God is writing, that you and I are a part of that story, in which God is rescuing us. He is redeeming us. And the way that he's accomplished that is through his son, Jesus. Jesus on the cross died to atone, to pay for our sin so that you and I can have a relationship with God. So that you and I, think about this, so that you and I can worship God. That we can worship God. John 14:6, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me, except through Jesus. Earlier than that, Jesus said, I and the Father are one. I and the Father are one. God is calling us to worship through Jesus. And if we know Jesus, then we know God. If we believe in Jesus, then we can have a relationship with God. And if we have faith in Jesus, then we can truly worship God. I don't know if you've ever been to a really cool event or anything like that where they give you one of those passes, like a VIP pass. And you get the VIP pass, and that gives you access to the event. That gives you access. Maybe you can go backstage and hang out with the band or whatever. The blood of the cross, our relationship with Jesus, that's our VIP pass to come to the throne of God, to encounter God. You and I, if we have faith in Jesus, we have a pass. We have a VIP pass. We have been purified by Christ and made righteous by Christ so that we could have an experience here like Jacob is called to. that we could go to the house of God and worship at the altar of God. And you and I, just think about this. We have the privilege. This is why we gather here. We have the privilege to commune, to fellowship with the creator of the universe. You know, on Sunday morning, some of your friends, they might go out for brunch. Maybe they're watching a movie. Maybe they're getting a little more rest. They're doing all that stuff. And look, I'm not trying to talk down on that because I like to do those things. But you and me, we have the privilege today and every day to come before the God of heaven, to come before the creator of the universe, to encounter the one who can do all things, who knows all things, who holds the world in his hand. That's what we have the privilege to do. That is the blessing of worship. That is why we gather here today. There's a million other things that we could be doing, and I know that all of us in this room are really busy people. We're really busy people. We've got work and friends and family and sports, and we've got, it's just stuff. We've got a lot of stuff. And I'm not trying to dog on any of that stuff. But what we have an opportunity to do here, what we have an opportunity to do in our own life every day, to worship God, there's nothing better than that. There's nothing better than that. There's just nothing you're going to find. You will not find it in the world. I'm not saying you can't find happiness in the world. You can go to the bar and find happiness. You can get $8 Netflix subscription, find happiness. But the God of eternity, the creator of the universe, the only place you're going to encounter him is through worship. And God is calling us to worship. Don't miss it. Don't miss it. Friends, we're going to close this morning. I'm going to stop talking about worship. I heard an amen there. I'm going to stop talking about worship. I'm going to invite the band to come back up. And as we close our time together, let's worship God through song. We've heard his word, and we've been worshiping him through fellowship, and we've been worshiping him just by coming here and through our giving and our gifts that God's given us. But as we close this morning, we're gonna sing a little bit longer than we normally do. I want to invite you. I want to invite us as a church. We're a church about Jesus. And then we should be a church about worship. And so I just invite you this morning just to stand and to worship God with us.